Joining us this morning is former Florida Congressman Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. Colonel, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. You heard Vladimir Putin there. Your reaction?
Well, you know, you're dealing with a former KGB colonel, so you know he's going to take whatever you're presenting, he's going to twist it. What the commentator there from the other network should have done was talk to Vladimir Putin about what we know he is actually doing. Gerald Nicholson and also the Secretary of Defense Mattis has said that Russia is supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. And you could have easily cornered him and asked him about that, and asked him about his interventions in Syria, and asked him about some of the other incursions he's doing in the Arctic and what have you. But when you have this politicized agenda that certain networks are after, he was right in saying you guys are just sensationalizing, and maybe next they're going to go look for the Loch Ness Monster.
Well, it was really creative, though, to insert Trump in the whole meddling thing. That was very creative on the Dems' part, I have to say. I mean, and they've gotten that narrative, and they've written it hard.
Well, Maria, as the colonel said.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about this is, remember when Barack Obama was meddling in the Israeli elections with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Yeah, right.
And they used State Department taxpayer dollars. And just recently we had Obama meddling in the French elections, you know, making a video in support of Macron. So, you know, Vladimir Putin, once again, he understands how to checkmate you. And that network, they kind of look like they had egg on their face to me.
Steve Rogers.
As the colonel said, Maria, we're dealing with a former head of the Soviet KGB, a master at deception, a master at disinformation. And there's no question in my mind, and I don't think in anybody's mind, that Vladimir Putin knows exactly where that information came from and who was meddling. If not directed by him, he knows what went on and who committed these acts.
Thoughts? This was one of our guests last week on the show said disinformation. That's what they do there. Here at home, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, you know, you have Putin on, and whether he said he did or didn't do it, I think people would have. You have to question what his motives are and whether or not he's telling the truth anyway. So to put him up there to say he did get involved or he didn't get involved, right. I don't really see what the difference is.
You aren't going to get a real answer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I walked away from that interview and went, well, what was the point of that? Quite frankly.
Yeah.
If he's going to sit there and deny everything and spin it back and make it about the American people being obsessed with him in Russia, it was a head shaker.
Colonel, back at home, President Trump expected to make a new push now for infrastructure investment, including a push to privatize air traffic control across the country. What's your take on this? Can Congress find common ground in terms of turning the now conversation toward infrastructure?
Well, this is something that they should have done early on, and we've had this discussion before. If you had done a one-time lower tax rate repatriation for the corporate business earnings that are offshore, we could have used that for infrastructure repair.
Yeah.
As far as privatizing all of our air traffic control, I think that we don't want to lose that control. I think that one of the things we could look at doing is maybe allowing certain airports to privatize their TSA. I know that out in San Francisco they have that in place, and I think you will have more efficiency and better security practices. But I think we want to make sure that our air traffic controllers are on the same sheet of music as far as their practices and procedures.
Mike Murphy, on the one hand, you want to see the administration continue and focus on its domestic agenda, but now we're bringing into the conversation, you know, details on infrastructure. Where are the details on tax and tax reform?
Well, I think we need both, Maria, because it's a complex position, obviously. But now I think President Trump needs some wins behind him.
That's
so
true.
whether it's going to be infrastructure or tax, I think one thing that he's doing is using the global headlines, the terrorism that's out there, kind of. I hate to say using it, but to his advantage to say, look, I've talked about needing this travel ban. I think now the travel ban gets passed because of what's going on. And I think I'm not against Muslims, but I am against anyone who's coming to this country to blow up me or my family.
Well,
and I think that's the point.
And I think that, to Colonel West's point, that will be a huge hurdle in trying to privatize air traffic control, because the security screeners and security at our nation's airports was private before 9/11. It was George Bush, President Bush, who privatized it was one of the biggest nationalizations that we've had in modern history, who nationalized, turned the airport security officers into government workers. So now to make the argument that air traffic control ought to be privatized and taken out of the hands of the FAA, that's going to be a long slog.
What do you think about that, Colonel?
No, I think she's absolutely right, and I think that if you're talking about having a win, I think look at what we can do with the TSA. But one of the things that President Trump has to do, I think he needs to have a primetime address to the American people on his national security policy and his vision. We need to understand what is the Trump doctrine. You cannot do policy by 140 characters. And
Yes.
if the American people could understand these 6 countries that he's talking about, if they could understand that the Manchester bomber had just come back from one of those countries that are listed in this temporary travel halt, a travel ban, and that is Libya. We have a serious problem with people going back and forth, traveling and transiting, and we need to be able to block that. And incredibly so, Theresa May used to be the Home Secretary, and she was against any type of restrictions on this free and open travel. Now look at what she has created in her own country.
And you know, Colonel, you bring up a very good point. The president needs to address the nation to get the story straight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
he
we'll
has
see.
to,
Yeah.
especially on national security.
All right, we will be watching that. Maybe he will. Colonel Alan West, good to see you, sir. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.